Let's talk about this now. And we speak to David Bruce. He is from the Institute for Security Studies, a consultant and independent policing researcher. David, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. This kind of, or should I say, these kinds of incidents were forewarned ahead of these elections. Do you think that the police here were caught off guard, or is it going to be a case of reacting to some of these events?
Well, what appears to be happening in Umtata is something that might not necessarily have been anticipated. It's, I think it's reasonable to say that this isn't a conflict that is directly election related. It's a continuation of volatility and conflict within the taxi industry, within the Eastern Cape. It came to a head in the middle of last week with various incidents of violence in parts of the Eastern Cape, including Umtata and Maclear. And, you know, since then there have been various factors which have contributed to, let's say, perpetuating the conflict. So, it's one of those situations where, you know, conflict and volatility within, which is, you know, not specifically political in nature, is in this case impacting or has the, you know, seems to hold a risk of impacting on the main voting process on Wednesday, and as far as I understand, has already possibly had some impact on the special voting process today. Exactly,
and that's the point, David, because last week the Net joins issuing very strong warnings against the truck drivers who were sort of saber rattling, if you like, trying to make sure that their grievances could possibly be addressed at a very sensitive time like this, but they backed down at the last minute. So do you think that this possibly has got to be the approach? Because as you rightly say, voting was interrupted because we are now effectively in the voting period, special votes taking place today and Tuesday.
Well, you see, I mean, this is one of those situations that creates a bit of a conundrum for the police, because it's evident that there were serious crimes committed last week, including 2 people being killed and quite a number of people injured by gunfire. And it would seem that that would have been the motivation for seizing a large numbers of firearms from, as far as I understand, it was members of a specific taxi association. And that action on the part of the police seems to have provoked a further reaction from people within the taxi industry. So, you know, it's not unheard of for there to be a situation where there's a conflict between the interest in enforcing the law and maintaining order. You know, I think in this situation, a lot of people would agree that the success of the election is of primary importance. But, you know, there's a bit of a tension here between the obligation of the police to enforce the law and to try and ensure that the crimes that were committed last week are properly investigated.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you know, one would hope that in some ways cool heads will prevail. I mean, I don't think, you know, the taxi industry itself would stand to benefit from overall disruption of the election. And I'm sure, you know, let's say, I would like to think that it will be possible to restore calm, you know, hopefully at least within the next day in the Umtata area, so that at least on Wednesday, the proper voting process can go ahead.
Yeah. We know, David, it is no secret that the South African National Defence Force is on standby and in some areas quite visible, in fact. the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Oscar Mabuyane, calling for the presence of the army in his province. Is that an overreaction or part and parcel of not wanting to let anything to chance?
Well, my sense is that it is probably possible to resolve the situation without bringing in the army. But certainly if it looks as if it's going to continue, beyond, continue to cause serious disruption in Umtata, tomorrow and on Wednesday, there would certainly be a justification, I think, for calling on the military to help in maintaining order and just providing a sense of security to people that they can vote without, any real danger or threat to their safety.
Yeah, well, part of the reason why I asked that question, looking at one news article today about this very incident of taxi drivers in Umtata, a story with the headline, and I want to quote directly now because it is actually placed in inverted commas. It says, "We want our guns back," quote unquote. Taxi operators shut down Umtata over seized firearms as SANDF moves in. Again, that question, very important. These are taxi drivers who perhaps want to raise grievances about their guns being taken away. We know that at some point there was quite a situation in the very area of Umtata where taxi drivers were unhappy about one or other and civilians, innocent civilians, get caught in the crossfire. So are police justified? Are officials in the Eastern Cape justified in wanting to make sure that they clamp down on any criminality?
Well, you see, I mean, that is what one would want the police to do. But the difficulty is that sometimes, firm law enforcement action, if one could call it that, does provoke a reaction. And so right at this point, that reaction is, causing serious disruption in the Umtata area. And at this point, looks as if it might threaten, the orderly conduct of the election in that area. So, as I say, it's one of those situations where the best response, the most appropriate course of action for the police to take is often, a difficult call. And so there's a tension between the interest in law enforcement in ensuring that, the incident of violence last week are properly investigated, and the concern to keep the peace in the area and try and ensure that there's a suitable climate for the election to be conducted.
Overall, is it your sense that the police are very well prepared for anything that might go awry in these elections? And I say that on the back of the National Commissioner of the Police, Fani Masemola, addressing his troops earlier today and making it very clear that where you are present, there must be peace and a smooth election that will be run. Are you confident that police have everything under control?
Well, you see, I think this isn't just about the police. I think the overwhelming majority of people who, at least are politically engaged, want the election to go ahead in an orderly and peaceful manner. The overwhelming majority of political parties certainly want it to be carried out in that way. I think what we need to, from my point of view, that the main risk is, in terms of, at this point, is not a risk of violence, but is the potential for disinformation, for attacks on the credibility of the election process, particularly by parties who aren't quite satisfied with the number of votes that they've achieved. So I think that those are the kind of dynamics that possibly pose more of a risk in relation to this election.
David Bruce, thank you very much for your time and analysis. Institute of Security Studies consultant, and he's also an independent policing researcher.